Namaste. Hello everyone. Welcome back to the NPTEL course Role of Craft and Technology in Interior Architecture. Today we will talk about module number 38 where we will discuss the interventions focusing on technology. So, while discussing about the technology based interventions in few previous modules we have already tried to understand that why the technology interventions are required. So, we will try to discuss a little bit more on the same lines and we will see some examples. So, we have already begun trying to classify the kinds of interventions, and we have been focusing primarily on the 4 kinds: process based, product or design based. Today we will talk about the technology based interventions, and then after that we will talk about the marketing and management based interventions. Now, we have already tried to understand that there are several issues and challenges that the craft sector today is facing, especially in India, and most of the studies that we have gone through also highlighted that the lack of technological advances is one of the reasons why this sector is facing a setback. And we also tried to understand and learn about some new technological advancements and techniques. So, we try to understand about the CNC techniques, the CAD/CAM models and few other examples, and how there is this whole new range of products coming up which combines the hand skills and the technology. So, taking our discussion ahead today also we will try to gather some information and then try to understand how the technology interventions can play a very vital role in the development of craft sector. So, the integration of technology in craft practice has affected virtually every aspect in the craft product's life cycle, from conception and design to the final sale. So, technological interventions help at varied stages, and overall they have helped in increasing the production, the value of the craft, the sales, and also the upgradation of the entire skill set possessed by the craft persons and their living standards. So, this is one area where a lot of inputs have been given by the ministry, lot of organizations, individuals and educationists and academicians, and the kind of technological advancements that are coming up are only reinforcing the importance of having a module like this and studying these interventions. So, when we are talking about the technological interventions or the technology based interventions, the important considerations are many, but these are few that have been highlighted by one of the studies. Resurgence of interest in making and craft products, and this ultimately would ensure broader consumer market. So, making and craft products, if there is an increased interest and there is an exploration in making itself, of course it will reflect on the market and the consumer buying the products. The democratization of design with patterns, techniques, tools and resources being freely exchanged, and consumers often involved in co-creation of products and services. We had a discussion on the same lines where we were talking about sharing of ideas, knowledge sharing, exchanging of ideas, co-creation, and that's how the market is driven today. Then promotion of approaches which advocate sustainability, ecological use and local production and development. So, we also saw one example, one international case study where the craft persons community realized the importance of local resources, and they tried to tap the local resources, and their production increased many folds, and their way of life, the living standards got better, the income got better. So, again that's one of the primary focuses. Also, the promotion of do it yourself culture, which is on a boom these days and it's really catching up, and it's very important that this kind of hands-on and doing it on our own, this kind of culture is promoted and the skills are promoted. Now, when we see the factors that drive the European craft revival, they also emphasize on technology interventions. So, out of all the factors that we see here, there is also the emphasis on the technology interventions in few of them which are enlisted here in bold. So the emergence of a digital fabrication and hybrid forms of making, the reinvention and repositioning of craft skills, techniques, patterns and materials, and their augmentation through integration of digital technology. So they also emphasize on the technology intervention part. So when we are talking about the technology intervention, there are a lot of researches that are happening, and there are a lot of designers and researchers who are talking about these technology interventions, and they are trying to find out various models, frameworks and the ways in which these interventions can be introduced and harnessed, and they are also acceptable at a community level, and then they could also operate and utilize these interventions on their own without being dependent on others. Integration of new technologies in design and making processes, for example, additive manufacturing, laser cutting, etc., can contribute to enhanced efficiency, of course, creativity, interactivity and customization of products. Now, customization of products is very important because that's what makes craft stand as a unique end product, rather than something which is mass produced and available, at every nook and corner. They also improve production processes by speeding up production, and then enhancing digital creativity through the exploration and visualization of concepts and ideas. So this technology could help the craft persons, explore and visualize the concepts and ideas, facilitating experimentation through rapid translation of design concepts into prototypes. So it also enables prototyping. And final pieces, enabling the production of new objects and unique designs affordable only through new technologies. From the maker's perspective, if we talk, the integration of technology appears to be regulated by a craft ethos, which can be manifested differently by contemporary and heritage makers. So the important point is that the craft ethos has to be maintained, and the craft persons and the community who have these skill sets and who try to integrate these interventions must welcome them as something that would better their existing conditions, and not as an imposition which they can't really work on their own and which they have to be dependent upon somebody else to take care of. So when we talk about technology intervention, there are also business models and frameworks like we were talking about, which highlight the importance of these interventions. New business models and organizational forms are afforded by the integration of digital technology. For instance, models based on emerging technologies such as digital manufacturing, models thriving on e-commerce, collectives and partnerships between makers and creative entrepreneurs, and other forms of association. So there is this digital technology which has seen this upsurge, especially in the last 2 decades, and then we see a lot of models which are emerging, and there is the play of digital media, there is a play of partnerships and associations, and there is also the application that we see which are more like web based, and they also are social media based. So that way technology is taking over, and then craft sector is also trying to make use of such technology interventions. So craft productivity is an inevitable problem in contemporary society and is also one of the driving forces for crafts entering commercial production and everyday life also. Recent years have witnessed an acceleration of collaborative innovations among making, new technologies and entrepreneurial approaches. So this collaboration is already happening, and it is giving way to new platforms. These include improving and innovating traditional crafts by appropriately adopting alternative materials, engineering and technologies. So again we see a lot of mention about the role of technology, the play of technology and the skill sets possessed by the community, and how the interplay of all of these factors could actually result in a successful community craft practice or an individual craft person's way of life. So technology interventions again are one of the major kinds of interventions that are now affecting the craft sector and also really helping improve the conditions and the living standards of the craft persons and artisans. So there are some examples, and these are from the NIF, the National Innovation Foundation, and two simple ones. Here if we see, this is the design making by weft insertion, and it also got the National Grassroots Innovation Awards. And here we see this very simple innovation, which is the stencil cutting device. So technology interventions, again, it could be at the level of machine, it could also be a technical know-how, it could also be an improvement in the existing hand tool or power tools. So it's a play of all these at different stages and different capacities, which ultimately help increase the craft production and help increase the craft person have a sustainable livelihood. So here what we see, we have already discussed many times this wood turning and lacquer craft workshop, but we have always discussed it in bits and pieces, and I am trying to discuss it in a sequential way and trying to establish that how the technology based interventions and product design based intervention can actually help a craft sector or a craft practice sustain. And this is of course done with the ICRC, and I worked on the monograph which focused on this entire workshop and the background research, and later this was also published as a paper. So I am just trying to discuss the findings of that paper and discuss the process that went throughout this workshop while I was working with the ICRC in Ahmedabad. So this is a very indigenous craft which is practiced in Gujarat, and it's called wood turning and lacquer work craft. And particularly we went to this craft cluster Dholka, which is not far from Ahmedabad, and we were trying to document the existing families who work on this craft form, and what is the process, the method, the raw materials they use, like everything, the kind of workspace they use, and what is the value and meaning of this craft to them in contemporary times, and how it has really transformed or evolved during last say 50 years. So as a team we were just trying to document that and understand, and we met a lot of craft persons there, but we were particularly working with Anil Bhai. He has a lot of experience, and this workshop happened almost like 5-6 years ago, so now the experience is added up, and he is the one of the younger generations who is working on this craft form, and of course the legacy has been carried already by the older and much more experienced generation. So he is the one who was very receptive to new ideas, and he wanted to explore and understand about the improved technical know-how, the different prototypes that would completely redefine the product range that he works upon, if there could be any kind of technology intervention, and the lathe on which he works could be also improvised and it produced better results. Because while we were studying, we tried to understand that there were constraints, there were limitations posed by the lathe, the power lathe which the craft persons use for turning the wood and making the sections of the wood, which would then join to create a prototype. So those were the discussions that happened, and there were like several visits, and Anil Bhai was very accommodating and receptive, and he himself had a lot of ideas. So it was a very fruitful process. So this was the workshop where he worked, and the different kinds of tools and machines, and this is the cross section that explains the spatial configuration of the work space which is used by the craft persons. So also we were trying to understand the postures in which they sit, what all different kinds of hand tools, power tools and machines they work with. Then we also documented the step-by-step process of how this craft is practiced, and right from procuring the raw material, the wood, how each stage is progressed, and all the way till finally how it is transported. So through illustrations which was done by the team, and this was documented. So storing, cutting, turning and shaping, sandpapering, lacquering, polishing, all these stages were understood and documented. Painting, varnishing, pre-assembly, packaging, and of course the final one, the transporting. So all of that was tried to try to be understood, documented. We also tried to learn how the lacquer is used and how the color is done, and at what stage the women are involved, and where do they procure their raw materials from, and then how it is stacked so effectively so that the optimum space utilization could be done while transporting, and this could also be economic. So all these things were done. So what this paper tried to understand, and what this attempt was, first of all, to understand what was their existing product ranges, and how during the course of this workshop with CEPT University, a new product range could be suggested, along with the explorations in alternative materials and not just the timber that is already being used there. And another thing was, as I told, any kind of intervention with the technical know-how or technology which could improve the efficiency and the production, and it was recorded because of that intervention how the production increased. So all these documentation files were made. Even the tools were documented, what are the hand tools, like I told. So just to understand how this craft form has already evolved, and there are still regional variations that could be seen. So if we see in another craft cluster in one of the other villages of Gujarat, the traditional lathe, which is called the patri, is used, and this work is entirely done by hand. So it's a very simple mechanism, it has an easy operation, it works without electricity, and it works as a hand powered tool. So I was mentioning about Nirona. So when we see this craft being practiced in Nirona, it's done on a very small scale, because the traditional lathe, the patri, cannot accommodate different designs and huge sections of wood. It requires a lot of time, and the production is very less. So this family is actually facing a lot of problems, and this is almost a languishing craft in the village Nirona. While if we see the other cluster that we are talking about, Dholka, so here they use the power lathe. So here it is operated by weights and pulleys and the conveyor belts, and the production increases manifold, the time consumption is reduced, and the product range is completely different. And they also used bamboo instead of timber, because timber is not available in that much abundance, and different kinds of joinery also, rather than just the traditional joinery that was used in making the baby cradle or some utilitarian objects. So again, so there is this technology intervention, there is technical know-how, and there is also the redefining of the product range, plus exploration of alternative materials. So all that was simultaneously happening during this workshop, and we were trying to understand. So if we see, with the new improved tools and machines, and with this technology intervention, their product range improved, and there was a wide range available now. There were a lot of experiments and collaborations that resulted in interesting prototypes. Craft persons, it allowed them to be economically strong, because the prototypes were so interesting that they already started getting the projects while we were still having workshops with them. So all of these things help, because if we see Nirona, they are not able to meet the demands of production, and the hand powered patri, the hand worked patri, doesn't really help them come up with more products which are interesting, as well as the more number, the quantity. So that way these kinds of interventions are something that will help the craft sector. This is just one example. So we see some more pictures of this power lathe. It reduces time of production. Both ends are free to operate. Electricity is not a problem in Dholka. Most important thing is that the craft persons, Anil Bhai and his entire team, they understood how it operates, and in case there is some problem, they do not need any outside help. They can operate it on their own, they can fix the problems, and that's how it makes them confident, independent. It reduces the time that is otherwise consumed in making the products, and it increases the production, it accommodates experimentation, and it results in much better quality and interesting prototypes, which are also driven by the market demand. So there are other machines also which are being used, and the permutation and combination of these different machines and the power lathe actually enables the entire team of the craft persons to make interesting prototypes. So, but largely the work is still done by the hand and feet coordination, and that's how we are not snatching away from the craft person's skill sets, and we are still utilizing their mind and their ability to conceive and conceptualize and design the prototypes and the products. And here there was this record which was made, and for all the different stages, right from storing to transportation, how the number of craft person involved and the time duration was drastically reduced when the power lathe was used, as compared to what would have been there if the hand lathe or the traditional patri was used. So all of this was recorded, and there was a major change in the number, and like this was very efficient. The interventions made it very efficient, and the production increased. So these kinds of recordings were done. Also, like I told, during the course of workshop we tried to do a lot of explorations. So now lathe could accommodate larger and thicker sections of wood, which was not possible earlier. So with this technology intervention and the power lathe, the more thicker and larger sections of wood could be accommodated, and more structural prototypes could be explored. Also working with other materials, so bamboo is cheaper than wood, so how to use bamboo, some explorations were done with that. And it was also possible to achieve gentle and sharp curvatures, undercuts and successive curves of greater variety. So there was possibility of having different sections again. And then, like I told, some combinations of different kinds of joinery, permutations and combinations of grooving and forms and different massing, and how the different prototypes were explored. And very interestingly, a partition system, shelving system, exhibition panel system, units of modular display system, staircases, railings and other space making elements, they were explored in the wood turning and lacquer craft, and few of which probably I would have the pictures of, not all of them, but a lot of prototypes were explored. So extending the conventional forms to forge new products, which certainly is a good idea to open up a new market and let the craft survive and sustain. So this of course we have seen in a lot of other modules, but I am discussing it in great detail today. So again, this is this partition system that was designed, this is the railing that we were mentioning, and the joinery again. So all those explorations along with the technology intervention and the technical know-how intervention, that completely changed the situation of the craft sector, and how it has paved new ways that they are getting new projects. And we are also comparing Nirona and Dholka just to understand what technology interventions and design interventions can, how strongly they can make a difference. So drawings were made, the team worked on it, the assembly, the entire system was understood, the different sections were drawn with all the dimensions, and this is now installed there. And like I said, craft persons do not depend for technical assistance. This power lathe is easy to operate, and this accommodates the growing need and changing demands of the market. So this is a very simple, I would say, incremental innovation which focuses on the technology upgradation as well as the design upgradation, and it gives confidence to the craft persons. They don't feel like just skilled laborers, but they can own up the idea, the technology as well as the design. So, like we were discussing, to begin with, why at all this intervention was required. So, like I said, the initial lathe couldn't accommodate different sections of wood or a particular dimension, and also the production was less with the traditional lathe. So, all of these interventions were required, and this kind of gap study always helps. What are the issues and how one could actually intervene and help, and help the craft person sustain without really taking away their spirit and their ideas. So, again, continuing with the possibilities, different materials were experimented, like I told, of the bamboo, and yeah, this is something important. So, because there is also a play of color and lacquer, so a company like Asian Paints, there was this idea, the working idea that a company like this could really approach them and work with the craft persons and come up with the color palettes which have natural pigments, and then different kinds of lacquer applications for surface development, and these kinds of explorations could be possible. So that kind of discussion was happening at that stage. I'm not really sure what is happening now, but there is a plenty of new directions, and there is a lot of way forward to create a roadmap that would create interesting paradigms for the craft design collaborations and these interventions. So all of this we try to understand through this workshop. Now, having discussed the different interventions, let us focus in the next module on marketing and management based interventions, and here are some references. Revival of Crafts and Social Change is the paper that I was discussing at length today, focusing on Dholka, the work done with the ICRC. The paper also mentions the ICRC's role and involvement. Supply chain management, we will see more of it in the next module. Of course, the design intervention in craft revival. Thank you.